This is Duke University.
The humanities are always evolving. Caribbean studies could, in a certain sense, be seen as a reinvention of European and American studies around their outsourced power and labor structures. I asked Sidney Mintz this morning if Caribbean studies had existed when he began his work, and he said that even more basically, I don't think anyone had conceived of the Caribbean as an area. He wrote a groundbreaking article for Alfred Métro on that very point in 1959. The other article that he later wrote for Métro was Toward an Afro-American History. The Haiti Lab at FHI has been a brief further evolution of the humanities and of Caribbean studies here at Duke.
At one point, we stopped at a small market in Cienfuegos, and Sidney walked up to a man selling potatoes. And I kind of watched this from afar. This was the late 1990s, and we were all interested, of course, in the particular ways that small farmers were operating in the interstices of the Castro regime. He asked this man, I think I'm remembering this correctly, if he'd ever seen a particular kind of potato, sort of reddish in color, that grew in Puerto Rico. And so the conversation started. They bantered back and forth. Do you mean like reddish purple, or reddish orangish, or like what size? Does it have? And this went on for 15, maybe 20 minutes. And then different kind of other farmers who were there started coming over. And what are these guys talking about? Discussing different types of potatoes, the details of whether they were easy to grow and sell and so forth. And of course, this then became a bigger conversation, right? What potatoes do you sell for the market? The difficulties of selling and marketing in Cuba, struggles with dealing with various challenges in the context, sometimes, by sideways, but in fact, getting into these very, very intense and interesting debates. He gathered a rather startling amount of information, I'd say, about what was happening among Cuban peasantries right at the time. It was sort of a wonder to watch. It's something I'll never forget. So Sidney demonstrated for us, I think, one of the great techniques of ethnography, which is getting at things, from the side, from the angle, slowly getting to core issues by asking seemingly innocent questions.
I went to Haiti in order to study primarily a society that had very few national institutions. And the reason I wanted to do that, because in the Puerto Rican experience, Stewart had this slightly cockamamie idea about how we were going to do a study of a complex society. We would do these communities that were economically important, 5, 6 of them. And then we would see how they were tied together by cross-cutting socio-cultural institutions, banking, military, things of that kind. Well, we did pretty well with community studies. We didn't do anything very well with the cross-cutting institution. I think from that point of view, it was a study that failed. But in the course of doing that, I became aware of how important those institutions are. Haiti, by contrast, had very few, if any, national institutions except the army. There was very little that tied it together as a nation. So I thought, well, in the absence of something that I could look at of that kind, what is there? And the answer, I still think, the marketing system. The marketing system is a national institution. And things travel along its routes very quickly. So it doesn't take long at all for things to, they have a word, and if you give me about 5 seconds, I'll think of it. Telediol. Anybody know what telediol is?
Telediol, yes.
We both know what telediol is. The word yol is jaw, and it comes from an old Romance root, as you know, gul, degula. That same root. It means jaw. And in English, jowl is the closest we get to it. Jowl, either probably borrowed. So it means jaw. And tele, as in telephone, telegraph, anything. So telejaw is word of mouth. And I watched market women 75 miles away from Port-au-Prince tell me the morning after it happened that Dubois had put another 1-cent tax on soap. It really tried, telediol is very fast. So the market, if you look at it, at the way people are in it and what they do, the market is the closest you come to something that is all over the country, an economic institution in this case, and it has persisted in spite of everything, in spite of the cholera, in spite of the earthquake, in spite of Americans. It's existed through the history of the country. I made a mistake, and it's an obvious one, but that's the kind of mistake I make. I thought I was going to interview women in the marketplace. Well, that's really idiotic. They had no time to follow around some idiot trying to speak Creole while they were doing it. So I learned that what I have to do is get to know market women at home, at RAS, with their families, and then go to market with them. And that's the way to learn about market. So that's what I did. And my experiences were marvelous and funnier than hell, and interesting, and demonstrated to me again what I always supposed, which is that ordinary people who are illiterate can be very, very smart about a lot of things, and people who don't have college degrees, they can be awful smart. So it was a good experience, a humbling one, and a liberating one in a way, to be able to work with those people, to the point where occasionally when one of them had to go pee, they would let me sell for her. But that was, I think, the most important, for me, the most important part of my learning there, was working with those market women. It's, I think, not only not like any other country in the Caribbean, it's probably not like any country in the world. Well, of course, every country is unique, but this is unique in unique ways. And one of the reasons is that it lost its colonial apparatus so early in its history, and thereby didn't get the kinds of institutions that the British and the French and the Dutch and the Danes and everybody else imposed on the people who they subjugated. So that institutional structure wasn't there. A little bit that had been there was destroyed by the Revolution when the French left. So that's what makes it unique, I think. And of course, it's a history of people who were taken somewhere else and then had to recreate their society by themselves. The move away from fieldwork in anthropology, that a lot of anthropologists were trying to do anthropology of a different kind without fieldwork. And the reasons that were given had to do with abusing the informant or invading the informant's territory and things like that. And I thought it was unfortunate that they were giving up fieldwork, because fieldwork is the only thing we know how to do. We don't have any special techniques for doing things. We can't replace fieldwork by buying a drone and flying the drone into someone's living room. Can't manage that, won't work. Can't because it's too expensive. So fieldwork, and you have to learn to do fieldwork. Fieldwork does take a certain amount of learning, but then so does riding a bicycle or diving properly. And the benefit of it is that you're hearing things that no one else has ever heard. And if you know how to elicit answers, you'll learn more than you expected to learn, because we start with the assumption that people don't want to tell us anything. And what you discover is, if you trust them and show them respect, most people will tell you more than you wanted to know. I was working with a good friend, a young Puerto Rican scholar, who was himself Puerto Rican and who had studied at Columbia, had his master's from Columbia in sociology. And we were working on land in the community where we were, trying to trace its history. And in the course of that, we'd gone to the municipality capital, which is the city of Ponce, in the south coast of Puerto Rico, and gone to the alcaldía, where those kinds of records are kept. And we looked about, and we opened one room, and it turned out to be a large kind of courtroom where cases were tried. It was done in Caribbean wood, and the room had windows along one whole side, and the room shone rather like the effects you sometimes get in a cathedral. It was a magnificent little room, quiet. And hanging alongside the judge's dais in front on one wall was a bigger-than-life painting, oil, of a man in 19th century costume. And it was a man named José Sosa Barbosa, who was the founder of the Republican Party in Puerto Rico and a contemporary of Lincoln's. And as I looked at it, I thought to myself, I've lived in my own country for the whole of my life so far, and never have I seen a black man honored in an official building of my country. And it began to change my mind about where I wanted to work. And the idea that I had, that was my own, was realizing that Puerto Rico was one of a large number of islands all of which to some degree had gone through a common historical experience. And though I could not have put it that way then because I hadn't thought enough about it, I realized that I was in the middle of capitalism's first overseas experience. Sugar it's the first time that I'd written that way about a substance. And sugar is an unusual substance because of the way it tastes. So it's very different from gold or lead or coal or oil or other things. It's not only not those things but a food, but it's a food that's different from other foods because of its intrinsic sweetness. Sweetness is the only privileged taste that humans have. And when I say privileged taste, what I mean is that mother's milk is sweet. And sweetness is the only taste we get from very early in life. And most American hospitals, they give a newborn baby a solution of 5% glucose in water so that it won't have cramps. And we sort of celebrate the resurrection by eating a 6-inch chocolate bunny. So taste is very important. That's the first thing to say about it. The second thing is, I was trying to suggest that there was a relationship between core and periphery that's often put as core and periphery. And in this case, if you're thinking about, say, Jamaica and England, those aren't the right words. They really aren't the right words. What you get on the one hand is sugar and rum and molasses for the working class of Europe. And on the other hand, you get cloth and instruments of torture for the slaves. That's the trick. So it's going both ways. And it's just intense one as it is the other. You have the toilers of Europe, the rural proletarians of Europe on the one hand, you have enslaved Africans on the other hand, producing for each other. They don't know anything about it. They're just doing what they're made to do. And I wanted to get people to think about it as one thing, not core and periphery, but one thing, it's one system. And we're always taught, well, there's a country and then there are colonies. And that's not the way to think about it. If you go to a country that you know nothing about and you can't speak the language and you have a friend who does and he has a car, tell him to drive you to somewhere where there's a village. And you get to a village where you can see something growing in the backyard. And get out and get him to ask the man if he can walk in the backyard. Of course, I can say, yes, you walk in the backyard. What is this little plant? The man tells you the name of the plant. When do you plant it? When you plant it in March. When does it come up? It comes up in June. And what color are the flowers? Are blue. And what's it good for? Well, people used to eat it, they don't eat it anymore. Now what they do is they peel back the leaf of it and they use the stuff that's mucilage. You can paste the lettuce. You don't have any glue. You can paste the lettuce. Or it's cotton ball and you can use it, you can make a wick for a lamp with it, or whatever. And you tell him thanks, that's very interesting, and then you tell him about some plant where you come from, and then he tells you about a plant he doesn't have, but he had it last year, and you come back next year to have it for you, and you talk for a little while. This poor bastard has never been asked a respectful question by a fellow citizen since he was born. Everybody who comes there is a big shot. The only people ever stop and ask him anything is where's the next bar or the next gas station. And here's this big foreigner with a car who comes to him and asks him about his plants. And he knows about his plants. And he begins to trust you because you show respect for his knowledge. Nobody ever shows respect for his. He works with his hands. What knowledge do he have? That's what anthropology's strength is. And if you want to give that up, give that up and spend your time reading Foucault. You want to do that? With me. Good luck.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.